What's up guys, welcome back to the Mr. Fix-It channel. I got a CX500 in the shop today and it's seen some unfortunate issues. Stay tuned.
I was sitting out there in the shed one evening, not doing too much of nothing, just kind of staring at the wall.
So this bike has been on the channel before. I think a year or two ago. Did a bunch of work to this bike, had all kinds of problems. I'd seen some unfortunate mechanics in the past, but the reason it's back is not because of any of the work that was done to it before, but the transmission somehow got stuck in third and fourth gear, wouldn't shift up any higher or lower than third or fourth. So if you've seen that previous video, you saw where I went and picked up a spare engine for this bike because I needed the water pump impeller and could not find one on the internet. And since the transmission in that engine messed up, the owner put this spare engine in and had some issues in the swap, and I'll get into that in a minute, but the main thing here is I need to get this bike running. So it's never ran with this engine in it. Looks like the rear case half has been swapped from the old engine to the replacement engine. And so this bike has aftermarket electronic ignition in it, and it requires a special timing rotor. That didn't get swapped over, and another really unfortunate event happened when he was tightening the water pump impeller. The end of the camshaft snapped off. This is where the water pump impeller installs onto these splines. Well, he used a torque wrench and everything, but when he tightened that down, thread snapped off. He said he welded it on. I haven't got in there to look at that yet, but we need to address that issue, and we need to swap this timing rotor onto that engine. Now, I don't know if the engine has to come out to do that. I'm hoping I don't have to dig that far into it. I think I might be able to get that overflow bottle out and get that cover off and hopefully swap that out. Don't know yet. We'll have to get into this, so got to start somewhere. Alright, so I pulled this off the other motor. So I'm going to pull that timing rotor hub cam thing, whatever you call that, out of that motor, stick this one in, and at that point we should have spark. Okay, there's both those screws out. And there's the little timing cam. So you can see the differences in these. They're quite different. So we need to use this one. So let me install this one in there, and that should fix the spark problem that he was having. Now, because I moved this, I'm probably going to have to set the ignition timing. So I'm just going to leave this cover off for the moment, and hopefully this battery's got some juice in it. Well, he probably told me that the battery is dead and I just didn't remember, but the battery's completely dead. So I need to get that battery on charge, and then we can crank it, check for spark, see if we can get it started, check the timing. And he did say something about that water pump. I might open this up and just have a look, but he was expecting me to have to drop the engine and pull this cover off to fix that issue. And if I can save a bunch of time, I may not mess with that water pump impeller, but I may. So let me get this battery on charge. We'll go from there. Alright, so the battery that's in this is completely cooked. So I've got this car battery hooked up to jumper cables with the battery charger running on it. And I had to redo a couple ground wires. The ground for the battery was grounded right here, and there was a bunch of paint and it wasn't real tight, so I cleaned that off. And I added another ground wire because I didn't see a frame to engine ground anywhere. So I ran another ground wire directly over to the starter. And let's see if we got spark. So key on. And make sure we got contact here. Alright, looks like good spark. So making progress. It's a shame about that battery, but what I'm going to do now is I got to put that other carburetor back on. I need to screw that spark plug in, get it down off the stand, put the exhaust on it, throw some fuel at it, and we'll see if it'll bark off. So let me get all that and we'll go from there. Okay, setting the static timing with this electronic ignition is quite similar to setting the static timing with the points ignition. So you got to get the engine on top dead center. Now the cylinders are marked left and right. You crank the engine over by the crankshaft up front. You pull that plug out, stick your 17mm socket in there. And you're going to look through the inspection hole on this side, right there, and you're going to line up, see if I can zoom in on this, you're going to line up the F mark for the left cylinder. You can see there's a little timing notch right there by that bolt head, and that's lined up. That is for the cylinder on the left hand side of the bike. You want to make sure you're on the compression stroke when those marks are lined up. We're going to rotate that plate to the point when this is set up on the timing mark that this spark plug will fire. So we got that red LED in there, we got that green LED there, and as I rotate this, you can see how that LED comes on and off. Now every time that LED goes off, you get a spark. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to set this to where it just comes on right there, and tighten down the screws, and that'll set the static timing. Alright, I got the exhaust back on, got the spark plugs back in. I haven't put any coolant in it yet, but I'm going to prime the carburetors and see if this thing will start up and run a little bit here. Alright, contact. I don't want to let it run too long because I don't have any coolant in it. Alright, so that was the first time this engine has started in this frame. Before that we knew nothing about this engine. It did sound pretty good, just fired right up. But unfortunately that's just the beginning of this saga, because if you look right here, that is a pretty substantial puddle of oil on the floor for only a few seconds running. And I traced it up to behind the radiator, and it looks like it's coming out of this tachometer drive, which I can show you on this other engine. Right here is where the cooling fan lives, and there's this cover here and a gasket. There's a seal and an O-ring, and probably this gasket, maybe this O-ring and seal. So we'll have to address that issue. Also, there's that issue with the water pump impeller. I do really want to pull that water pump impeller cover off and inspect that weld and see how that's going on in there. Hopefully that's okay. So I don't know. We'll get to that when we get to that. But I started on this late today. It's getting late in the evening. I think I'm going to pick this up tomorrow. But yeah, progress. It runs. Alright, let's get back to work on this. I want to take that water pump cover off and get in there and look and see how that's welded together. Alright, what we got going on in here? Alright, so you can see where this has been welded on. Man, that's a shame. He said he used a torque wrench on that, but I think he had the wrong spec, possibly. If I remember right, I think he said 12 foot-pounds, which is way too much. Should be something more like 100 inch-pounds or something like that. Behind the nut that's supposed to go on here, there's a crush washer, and that keeps the coolant from finding its way through the splines on this shaft and into the engine oil. That's the main concern here. I guess worst case scenario, I'll go ahead and just leave this the way it is, and he can run this engine and keep an eye on the oil. If coolant does start ending up in the oil, then this will have to be fixed. But I think we're going to wait and do that at a later date if that seems to be the issue. So as far as I can tell now, I'm just going to leave that alone and we'll see what happens. Alright, so I got the bike full of coolant. I'm just letting it sit here and run and warm up and checking for leaks. and lo and behold, coolant is leaking, and it's coming from back in there, and that's coming out of the weep hole to the water pump, which means that the water pump seal isn't sealing. More than likely, that water pump issue is going to have to be fixed, because you can't have it leaking coolant everywhere, which means the engine's going to have to come out of this. So I need to get with the owner, find out what's going to have to happen with that. But as it is now, this bike's not going to be runnable. So that's unfortunate. So it's been a couple weeks. I got with the owner and we discussed the options of fixing that water pump issue. And that water pump connects to the camshaft, and the camshaft would either need to be repaired or replaced. Either way, the engine would have to come out of the frame. So searching on Marketplace, we found another engine for sale for a fair price, and he went and picked it up, dropped it off, and I think, it's, you know me, I like to fix things. I don't really like to just replace, like, you know, I would like to fix the engine, not just replace the engine. But financially, this would be a better solution to just replace this engine, because I would have to pull the camshaft out of this engine, and then I would have to pull the camshaft out of that engine, swap them around. Quite a bit of labor involved. I have to have gaskets and all sorts of stuff. The engine will have to come out either way. So buying a cheap engine, all I got to do is pull the old engine out, put the replacement engine in. So I think that's what we're going to do. So I have another engine sitting here. It turns over. It's been sitting in a garage for several years with no spark plugs in it, and it's been kind of open. So I took some time and I blew out the cylinders. I got my borescope in there and looked around. Everything looks fine. I lubed up the cylinders, cranked the engine over with the starter and stuff like that. It is making compression, although it does have a slight leaky intake valve on, would be the left hand cylinder. I think once I run it a little bit, it should come out of that. But hopefully this is a good engine. So I guess the mission here now is to drop the engine out of this bike and put that other engine in its place and get this bike running again, because that's the ultimate end goal, is to make this bike so you can ride it down the road. So that's the method I'm going to use. So instead of trying to screw around with swapping camshafts out or repairing camshafts, stuff like that, we're gonna see what it takes to swap an engine in this. It doesn't look too bad. The engine comes straight out the bottom. There's several bolts, wiring, hoses, coolant, stuff. So let's get into this. Here's where we are. So a couple things I'm going to have to swap over. Like this coolant pipe here is quite rusty. I think I'm going to swap that from that engine, put it on here. I need to swap that ignition rotor onto this engine, and whatever else I might find. So unfortunately this engine does have a broken engine mount right here. So that's a thing, but it's not going to affect it. It's got several other mounting points. That's not going to be an issue. This engine's a little dirty, but I'm not going to go into cleaning in this and all that stuff. I'll leave that to the owner to do. He can do that on his own time. Okay, so this bike doesn't have the center stand anymore, so I'm going to have to figure out a way to hold this bike up straight. That'll be the first step. Then I need to remove the exhaust. I need to drain the engine coolant. The most difficult thing I think about taking this engine out is undoing the drive shaft, and then several bolts, all the wiring's got to come off, and then the engine will drop down out of the frame this way. This engine will go right back in reverse procedure. So first things first, let's get this bike rigged up from the rafters here so that it'll hold it up straight for me, and we'll start getting stuff drained and pulled apart. Okay, next thing I'm going to work on is getting the carburetors off. These aftermarket carburetors come off really easy. So just unscrew the top cap, the slide, pull those out, a couple bolts, fuel lines, carburetors come off. Alright, got a couple other wires here. We got the oil pressure switch and the temperature sending switch. Unplug those. Alright, getting the drive shaft loose. We have to pull back this boot and expose a bolt in here, which actually was never installed. Okay, So we can just slide that. Alright, we can just slide that back. That was easy enough, but there's a bolt in there. You gotta peel this boot back, and you might have to rotate the rear wheel to get that bolt in a position to where you can get a socket on it. But since that wasn't installed, we don't have to worry about that part. Okay, we got the okay, we got the tachometer cable. There's a bolt right there, if you can see it in the shadow. Right there. Back that bolt out and then the cable will pull straight out. Okay, so everything's disconnected except for the things that we forgot to disconnect. And we got the main engine mount bolts. So basically we're going to undo these two bolts here, this bolt right here, and then there's a bolt here, and they're just short bolts, one on each side, and then a long bolt down here that goes all the way through to the other side. I got the engine supported by my jack. So let's get these bolts out and should be able to drop this thing down. Okay, this bolt was not even tight, so I can take it out by hand. This bolt's held into the engine case by a captive nut. So you pull that out and then the nut on the back is just set in a pocket. So I'll get the one out on the other side. Of course the bolt on the other side is a different size. Okay, now I'm going after the long through bolt. It's a 17 on this side, and I believe it's a 19 on this side. Nope, must be a 17 over here too. So 17, 17. Okay, now I'm going for these 4 on top here. Actually, they're 2 long bolts go all the way through. They look like these aren't the original bolts. These look like Imperial 3/8 bolts. So I'll need some Imperial sockets for these. Of course, every bolt on this is a different size. Let me grab a 9/16 wrench. Working on old bikes, a lot of times you'll find this where a lot of the bolts are mixed matched and different bolts. Well, that's not a 14 either, it must be a 15. Okay, there's some pressure on this bolt because it should be the last thing holding the motor in, so I'm going to jack the engine up. Take the pressure off of that and I can slide it right out. Okay, now I should be able to just let the engine down out of the frame, excluding all the wires and whatever we forgot to do. So let me try to lower this down, see what happens. The engine will have to go forward slightly to clear the shaft back here. So let's go down. Go forward. See, the starter's hanging up right there. Oh, I forgot to undo the starter wire. See, what did I tell you? There's always something you forget. So let me go back up. Let's see, that should be a 10mm. And the clutch cable, forgot about it too. You can slip that out just like that. And you can work this around. There. Okay, that should be everything that we need to unhook, except for everything we forgot. Alright, so whenever you're dealing with an engine that's been sitting for a while, insects like to get into places. So this is a good example of that. So if I pull off this crankcase breather, you can see insects are in there, so I'm going to take this off and swap it for the crankcase breather on this motor. So you can see there's debris down in there. Got to clean that out. Also inside that one. So I got to get those 2 ports cleaned out. Also, before I did anything with this engine, I did a compression test on it. I wish I'd have got this on camera, but I wasn't expecting to have to do what I did. But I did a compression test and both cylinders were only pumping about 30-35 pounds of pressure. And what I found is the valves were sticking a little bit. So what I did is I put some transmission fluid in both the intakes and both the exhausts and down each spark plug hole. I used a battery and the engine starter, and I cranked the engine over. That got everything wet and lubricated, and the valves sealed mostly. This intake valve, one of these two intake valves, is leaking a little bit. I'm hoping that once this engine fires up, that cleans up and that is no longer an issue. But these are some things that you want to take in consideration when you're swapping in an engine that has been sitting for who knows how many years. So that being said, the cooling system on this engine was all sealed up, so I don't think there's any issues going to be with that. I don't know if there's any oil in this engine. I did get a new filter and fresh oil to go in this. However, I don't know if this engine runs. I've never heard it run. The guy that sold it, I don't think he ever heard it run. So I think I'm going to use the oil out of this engine, which I wish I'd have drained that before I dropped it out of the bike, but because this engine has fresh oil in it, I'm going to drain the oil out of this engine, collect it in a clean container, put it in this engine, and then run this engine and the filter that's in it now. And when I know that engine runs, then I'll dump that oil out and put the fresh oil and filter in. So there's no point in wasting, you know, a bunch of money on oil and a filter on an engine that's not going to run. So those are things that you want to consider when you're installing an engine that hasn't ran in years, especially one that's been left open. Like this one didn't have any carburetors on it, no spark plugs in it. So I went through all that process to give this engine the best chance that it can to start up and run. So I'm going to swap over a few things, get this engine ready to go back on the bike. Okay, since we're going from this style of CDI unit to this style of CDI unit, we don't need any of these other wires except for these 3 yellow ones. These are for the charging system. All the rest of these are going to get cut out. Ideally, what I'd like to do is run these wires up through that grommet. And to do that, I would have to depin the end of this. So I think I'm going to take a few minutes off camera here. I'm going to depin this connector, pull it off of this, pull it out of this sleeve, and I'm going to run these wires up through this grommet just to make it look a little cleaner. So just a little extra time, make it look a little better. Otherwise, that's not going to seal correctly. I'd have to cut that, yada yada. The only thing that's concerned here is I have to make sure I get the right colors coordinated back in the correct spot. So give me a few minutes, do that, get that routed up, we'll get this sealed up, and we'll start putting the engine back in the frame. Alright, I got that all loomed up. Now, this cover, if you're using this ignition system, there's a tab in here. This needs to be bent up. You see, like that one's not bent up. You need to bend this tab up. Now, I just got those bolts here for the timing plate loose. And I'm going to loosely put this back on because I'm going to have to go back in here after the fact and do the spark timing. So I'm just putting this back on so no damage happens to that while I put the engine back in. Alright, I think the engine's ready to go back in. Let's go ahead and start getting this thing put in position. First thing we got to do is line up the drive shaft. Okay, this boot is kind of a pain to deal with here, but hold that thing back. Gotta get the frame lined up. That mount up there. Sure none of the wiring's getting pinched. Now you gotta look down through that bolt hole. This is a special bolt. It's threaded only on the head end, and that slips down into that groove in the output shaft. So you gotta get this thing lined up with that groove. This is that shaft in there. You gotta line this up with that groove, like that. Down in there with a light through the bolt hole, and then you can see what you're doing, and you can thread that guy in. Alright, that's together, tighten up that bolt. We can start throwing the engine mount bolts in. It's just a little dance. You got to go back and forth a little bit here and there. But you can get one of the bolts lined up in there. Alright, there's the main through bolt. From here on out, it's easy peasy. Alright, I took time, went ahead and hooked up all the wiring. I got the clutch cable, tachometer cable, carburetor's exhaust, the ignition system, everything's all hooked up. Got some gas to it. So this is this engine's first start in who knows how many years. And I believe the clutch is stuck because I tried to adjust the clutch and I can't get it to slip when I pull in the clutch, so that might have to be addressed. But let's go ahead and fire this bike up, or at least attempt to fire it up. So I did put transmission fluid in the cylinders, so it's possible that that's going to foul out the plugs when I try to start it, but we'll see what happens. It's liable to smoke. Yeah, let's turn the key on, hit the button, see what happens. It's possible I fouled out the plugs, so I might have to pull those out and clean them. It does not want to run with the choke off. Alright, so it will run. Probably got to pull the plugs out, clean those up. I got to address the exhaust leaks going on here. Probably need to put some new exhaust gaskets in it, which I don't have, so we'll figure that out. But yeah, it fired up. Alright, got the plugs cleaned. Let's see if it'll start back up. Well, looks like it's not getting gas or something. Let's see. Let's choke. Choke on both sides is on. There's one little fire. Almost like it lost compression. The sticky valves might be coming back to haunt me now. Alright. Okay, there's no coolant in it because I don't have the radiator or anything on, so I don't want to run it much longer than that. Definitely got to get some exhaust gaskets for it. Because especially this one, I don't know if you saw, I was seeing sparks fly out of that head. But it seems to be running. I don't hear any bad engine noises. I don't see any oil leaks. It's not smoke. I mean, it's smoking a little bit, but that could be from the transmission fluid that I put in the cylinders. So I still got to change out this cooling pipe on this side. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. Get the radiator installed. Get the engine coolant in, and I need to let it run and go through a couple heat cycles and stuff. Make sure everything's going to be good. Check for coolant leaks. All that stuff. Alright, so I got it sitting here idling. Other than the exhaust gaskets leaking, one thing I noticed that the temperature gauge isn't working. That's a sensor buried back inside there. And yet again, it's leaking from the water pump weep hole. I don't know what it is about these CX500 water pumps. They seem to not hold well. They're a real big job to replace. But, you know, this engine hasn't ran in years. I didn't hear it run before, you know, we put it in the bike. You know, you could spend a bunch of money, time, and effort and replace a bunch of stuff where you stick an engine in. But it's, you know, you kind of hope that everything's going to be okay. I did test the clutch. The clutch wasn't stuck. It works just fine, so that's good news. So maybe going in there and replacing a water pump seal. So that sucks. Well, I finally took this thing down the road. Runs good, but it didn't leak a drop of oil until I rode it down the road, and now guess what? Yeah, that's an oil puddle underneath of it now. So not only is it leaking exhaust and leaking coolant, it's also leaking oil. Oh, it's coming out of the shifter shaft seal. The gift that keeps on giving, right? Alright, so I'm back on the CX. I'm warming it up. I gotta drain the oil out. I want to fix that shifter shaft seal. And I gotta take the exhaust off and put the gaskets in the exhaust. And then gotta put the water pump in. So just gonna let it warm up here, get that oil hot, get it drained out, pop the exhaust off. I want to put it up on my jack so it's easier, you know, a little higher off the ground. And hopefully everything goes well here. Now, replacing this water pump seal, there's a lot of people that have videos of heating them up and taking the metal cup off of them and just replacing it that way. I'm going to attempt to do that here, because otherwise you're going to drop the engine out and pull that whole back cover off. That's a whole big deal. I mean, I just put this engine in here. I don't really want to pull it back out. So I'm going to attempt to do that, but that's where we are. Let this thing warm up, get that oil dropped out, go from there. See if I can do this without burning the crap out of myself. Of course, it's going to dump all over this exhaust pipe. That's fun. I can never not make a mess. Alright, brand new filter, 2 new O-rings. Of course, I'm not putting the oil in it yet. I just want to get this ready to go. Alright, now I got to get the shifter off of there. Actually, first I'm going to put it up on the stand. So, I already got the exhaust off. Let me get this thing up on the jack stand, and we'll take the shifter off. Or is that going to be in the way? Ooh, the jack might be in the way. So let me figure out what I'm doing first, and then we'll continue. Alright, I'm just going to go ahead and take the shifter off first. 2mm bolt down here. Alright, and there's that seal that I need to replace right there. Okay, so the first thing I want to try is this pick. Hopefully I can just pick this thing out of here. Pick ain't strong enough, I'm just bending it. Okay, try something else. This is a much stronger Mac O-ring pick. Let's try this. Alright, came right out. Okay. Brand new, genuine Honda part. This is not the same part number if you were to look this up for this bike, but this is the part that you get. This 91251-ZW5-003. So we'll install this. It's a tad narrower that way. It's the same OD, same ID. So we get all the crud off this shaft. A little bit of oil on the lip on the inside there. And I'll probably have to find a socket or something to tap this in place, or I might be able to just push it in with my fingers. Almost push it in with my fingers. Let me grab something to tap that in with. Alright, a short 19mm socket should do fine. Maybe a deep socket. It's not quite reaching. This is a deep 3/4, but it's the same as a 19mm. There we go. That's in. Might even be able to put the shifter back on. Yep. Alright, that's fixed. Alright, so this carb's got to come off. By the way, I already drained the coolant. I'm sure you didn't need to watch that. I'm sure you know how to do that. I'm sure I showed that at least once or maybe twice in this video alone. So we'll just move right along here. If you can tell by the sound of my voice that I'm getting a little burnt out working on this bike, but that's okay. We got to make it run. These aftermarket carb and intake setups are nice, but one thing I don't like about them is they didn't put a port in there to sync the carburetors together. You kind of need to be able to do that. Let's see, I'm just going to go ahead and pull this up, the fuel line the rest of the way off. It's just going to be in the way if I don't. We'll set this stuff aside here. We'll let that carburetor leak out onto the floor. That's fine. If you're worried about it, stuff something in that intake hole so you don't get anything down in the cylinder. We got to take this pipe off. We'll get this thing loose. Phew, it's been so hot here lately. Oh my god. Here in Ohio, it's been over 90 for the last like 5 weeks, and over 100 for a couple weeks now. And humidity has been anywhere from the 80s into the 90% humidity. Oh, so brutal. Very brutal. I should be able to just wiggle this out of here. Come on. Get out of there. Move it. Yeah. What the? Okay, so that's stuck in there. Par for the course. Alright, we've got one little coolant line up here. We'll just go ahead and continue. We'll take this cover off to the water pump. Okay. Alright, that's off. We'll tuck that back in here so we can forget about putting it on later, and we'll have a big coolant leak. Now, I do not have another seal for this in here, but that other engine over there has a brand new one in it, so we'll probably just steal the one out of that. So there's only 2 of these 12s. Of course, my air compressor kicked on, so I'll have to wait until that's done pumping up so it doesn't destroy the audio of this video. I'll be right back after these messages. I'm really hoping that everything is okay inside here and there's no major damage. It does seem like these CX500s have issues with the water pumps. Ooh, and that bolt does not feel good. I really hope that does not break off. Of course, I didn't bring a short 8mm, did I? Yeah, I got one. Okay. Of course, that won't fit in there. Always gotta love that game. Which tool do you need? 20 trips back and forth to the toolbox. Oh no. Please don't break. Please don't break. Come on now. Oh man. Be a mechanic, they said. You can make good money, they said. No. Oh. Oh my god, that one came loose. Now we gotta get this one loose. Oh god, it feels like it's gonna break. I mean, I could spray some penetrating oil in there, but it's literally gonna do nothing. Well, get on the screw. Yeah, they're starting to corrode. We try a little trick. So if I could just smack it like that, that would help, but I got, you know, stuff in the way, so I'm going to use this impact extension and try to shock that loose. Because I really don't want this bolt to break off. This bike has obviously sat outside for a while, sometime during its life. I feel the bolt twisting. Try heat, but usually when you heat up a bolt in aluminum, the aluminum will seize to the threads and then you pull all the threads out. Just gonna try working it back and forth here. Try shocking it again. Please excuse my squeaky stool. I know it's annoying, but I'm not going to kneel down and do this. Yes. Yes. Oh. Or did it break? No, it's coming out. Okay. For sure, if I'd have just tried to force that out of there, it absolutely would have broke off. So it always pays to stop and think about things and work the problem. Don't just force your way through things. Yeah, see all the corrosion on that? It was absolutely stuck in there. Okay. Now, the other thing we got to contend with on this cover is there is two alignment dowels. I believe there's one right here and one down here. So they're either here, or here and here. I can't remember. Maybe they're here and here. But with the amount of corrosion on these bolts, those are also going to be corroded. So there's a little pry point right here you can get a little pry bar into, and you can kind of try to pop that loose. I think there's one on the other side, so if you get right in here, you can kind of pry. So it did come loose. Okay, I think there's one on the other side. Let me go around the other side and pry on that side. So there actually is not a pry point on this side. She's coming. She's wiggling. It's spewing the goo everywhere. I cannot work on a cooling system or an oil system without making a huge freaking mess, ever. Just kind of walk this thing off of here. If your bike was well maintained, this will just come right off, but usually by the time I get stuff to work on, it's pretty much hitting the mouth. More silicone. Stop using silicone. Please stop. Just stop it. That's what the gasket's for. The pipe is siliconed in. Stop it. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this part and this part off of one of those other engines. Since this is all gooed up and nasty. Well, we'll see. I don't know. I got spare parts is what I'm saying. So we'll set that aside for now and forget that we saw it. Now we need to take the water pump impeller off. It's a 10mm nut. Right behind that there's a copper washer. Make sure you keep that or have a replacement. Just gently try to pry this thing and kind of rock it back and forth. And there should be a spacer ring in here. This part right here is very important. Do not lose this, and make sure you put this back in. Here's the crush washer. I'm going to anneal this before I put it back in. So the water pump propeller looks like it's in great condition. Not sure why this was leaking. Everything looks fine in here. I don't know how many miles is on this engine. And we're going to pry the rubber bit out of here. And we're going to leave that cup in place. And I think I see why it was leaking. Or at least I hope that's not why it's leaking. So there's RTV behind this cup. And if someone's had that out there before and it's not sealed up, then guess what? You might be pulling this engine back out to replace this cup. And there's no way to really know, because I got to put the water pump back in, fill it back up with coolant, and start it up and see if it leaks. And if it does, I got to tear all of it back down again. You don't ever know what you're going to get into on these old bikes. Dealers do not understand how good they have it, because they only work on cars that are 8 to 10 years old maximum. I don't even know if they take cars that are 10 years old anymore. Most dealers live in an area where it doesn't rust, and they have all kinds of parts on the shelf that they don't know if it works or not. They just throw a new one on and try it. They don't have to diagnose nothing. But here in my world, this is what you get. So the question now is do I gamble? I think I'm going to gamble. I'm just going to put the new seal into that cup, put everything back together, and cross all of my fingers and my toes. I would cross my eyes, but I only have one. So you're supposed to be able to just heat this thing up a little bit and the glue will release. So I don't know how long, 2-3 minutes I suppose, but I'm just going to keep checking it here because I don't want to get it too hot. There it comes. Yeah, so just heat it up a little bit, not too hot. Like I can still kind of hold that in my hand, but not too long. And then we'll reseal this into the cup on the engine. Probably use some silicone. I think I have gray somewhere. I'll use some gray silicone on this. Alright, so while I got this stove set up here and that plate's still hot, I'm going to anneal this crush washer. I'm going to turn the light down so hopefully you can see. I'm just going to heat it up until it glows cherry red and then let it cool. I'm sure most of you have seen this before, but for those of you that haven't, this is how you soften copper. I don't know if you could see it glowing or not, but it just glowed cherry red, just a light glow. And you can dunk that in water and cool it off if you want, or you can just let it air cool, doesn't matter. But that is softened and ready. So I'll set that there to cool, and we'll go get that seal glued in. Alright, a little bit of brake and parts cleaner. Get this clean inside here. I'm going to use this Felpro Gray RTV. Now I'm not going to gob this on here, I'm just going to put a film of it. So just a little bit, don't go freaking crazy. See, that's it. This has the little notches to line up with the tabs on that, so make sure you get those lined up. Alright, now we're going to peel out the old seal in the water pump here. And I'm going to clean this out really well. Alright, I got the new rubber piece and the ceramic disc in there. And I'm just going to run my finger around here and make sure there's nothing on either one of these two mating surfaces. Make sure that's clean. And don't forget this little ring that goes on there. And you can spline the impeller on. And then the crush washer. This is spring loaded, so you kind of got to push down and get the nut started like that. And then there's a torque spec for that, and you go look at the book. Okay, according to this Claimer manual, on page 145, it states, torque the impeller cap nut to 6 to 9 foot-pounds or 8 to 12 Newton meters. So we're going to go foot-pounds because this is America and we use the imperial system. 6 to 9 foot-pounds. This is my inch-pound torque wrench because my foot-pound torque wrench only goes down to 10, and you usually don't want to go to either extreme of your torque wrench scale. So I'm going to use an inch-pound, and to convert foot-pounds into inch-pounds, you take the number of foot-pounds and you multiply it by 12. Now, since my math teacher always told me that you got to learn your multiplication tables because you're not going to be able to go around life with a calculator in your pocket. Well, guess what? I have a calculator in my pocket all the time. So we're going to take, 6 to 9, let's say 7. I'm going to go 7 times 12. That's 84 inch-pounds. I'm going to torque that nut to. Now this is where things went horribly wrong with that other engine. And when this water pump impeller was being tightened, it was being tightened way too tight, and it snapped that off of there. So we don't want that to happen. There we go. Okay, I got this surface cleaned up. I'm going to go grab that cover off that other engine because it's got a new seal in it, and we'll get this put back together, and hopefully the coolant leak is fixed for the rest of this bike's life. Alright, I got that all back together. I had to replace the coolant temp sensor because it wasn't reading on the gauge. Hopefully it was just that and not this wire that was unplugged, because this way this wiring harness is here, it could have pulled this loose. Pretty sure it was plugged in, but went ahead and replaced that anyway. I really should wait for at least a few hours for that gasket sealer on that water pump to set up before I put any coolant in this. So that being said, it's just about 6 o'clock in the evening. So I mean, if I give it a few hours, that's going to make it, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. So maybe I'll just pick this up in the morning. The only thing I got left to do is put the exhaust gaskets in, put the exhaust back on, and then fill it up with coolant, put the tank of seat back on. Hopefully everything is good now and the bike can be done. It's been a huge project, 1, 2 engines over there. So I think I'm going to pick this up in the morning. There's no sense in ruining that gasket maker in here by putting coolant in it now, getting anxious. So we won't do that. I'll see you guys in the morning. Alright, tomorrow's here. I'm going to dump this coolant back in. And like I said before, this is still brand new coolant. And you always get a little bit of trash in the, when you drain this into something. So I like to use these paint filters, for painting cars when you're mixing your paint. So that'll strain out any little particles that happen to be in this coolant. So let's see what happens here when I add this. Alright, that's in. Of course, there's still some coolant on the floor from yesterday, but let me just look here, check the hose fittings and stuff. I don't see anything coming out right at the moment. Alright, got 2 new exhaust gaskets here. Hopefully this will fix the exhaust leak problem. So there's nothing to these, you just set them in the hole there and bolt the exhaust down. Of course, just so you know, I already removed the old exhaust gaskets that were in there. Yeah, so give me a few minutes, I'll get this exhaust mounted up and we'll fire it up, check for leaks and so on and so forth. So it's not even noon yet and it's already 95 degrees and almost 80% humidity. So yay. Let's fire this thing up and see how many leaks we have now. Likes the choke. Well, it sounds a whole lot better now. Let that warm up a little bit. Well, coming out of that O-ring in this pipe. Get a CX500, they said. They're great bikes, they said. Alright, let me let this cool off. Drain the coolant out. Alright, let me let this thing cool off. I'll drain the coolant back out, take the tank back off, pull that pipe back off, and put a new O-ring in there yet again. Is this the definition of insanity? Yeah, there is a little nick in that O-ring. Son of a... Okay, get a new O-ring in there. I'm running out of dry spots on the floor. Is that still leaking? Are you serious? What is going on here? Oh my God. There must be a scratch or something in that bore because it still leaks even with another brand new O-ring. You know, sometimes you're the bat, but today I'm the ball. Alright, it's been sitting here running for maybe 60 seconds or so. Everything is dry, nothing's leaking. I put 2 O-rings on that pipe. That's it only needs 1, but it's only supposed to take 1, but I guess it needs 2. Okay, everything looks fine. I'm gonna put the seat back on, take this thing down the road, and hopefully it's finished. Well, it ran good on the test ride, but I pulled it in here, and it didn't want to idle, and I just let it die, and now so I just tested the battery. The battery's dead. So I pulled the seat off, and there's a fuse here. This fuse was blown, but everything still worked. So I'm not sure what that's about. Obviously that's not charging. I mean, I tested the stator. I didn't test to see if it was charging, you know, but I did the continuity checks on the stator. Everything checked out there. So I guess I need to hook up a battery charger to this and see if the stator's charging. Man, this bike, it just doesn't end. Alright, the battery's charging. It was just that blown fuse. I'm not sure how this thing was wired. I didn't do none of the wiring on this. But it's charging. But the coolant temp gauge still isn't working, even though I replaced that sensor in there. I'm not sure what's up with that. Alright, I think I'm going to call that done. The floor is dry underneath. The exhaust is sealed. The battery's charging. It was just a blown fuse, if I didn't mention that before. The coolant temp sensor is working. Well, it's not showing anything now because it's cooled off, but yeah. Oh my god, this kind of questions my life choices here, but everything's fixed. Bike's running good. So if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing, and don't be afraid to fix it. Thanks for watching.